What's up guys and welcome back to TechPlan. Today we're going to be reviewing a really cool hydroponics kit that was sent to me by Letpot. Let's check it out.
Alright, this unboxing is a little different from the rest. This is not a light and in fact a really cool hydroponics grow kit, I guess you could call it. This was sent to me for free by Letpot. I actually have 2 units. So it'll be pretty cool to have them side by side and maybe I can do some experiments with them. So when you open up this box, you are greeted with a user manual that will explain how to assemble everything. There isn't that much assembly, but there is some. And then you're going to see the little pots in there, and these are the soil medium pots. There is also the hydroponic ones, and those are pre-installed in the units. You also are going to have the giant bucket for the water. That's basically where you're going to store your water. And there is a parts kit. In the parts kit, you're just going to have your hoses and whatnot and your little elbow brackets, and that's for assembly. You'll see a little bit more on that later. Now, when you go to get your soil pots apart, the best way to do it, I've found, because they are pretty stuck together from shipping, is you can twist that bottom more cup part and unlatch it, and then you can put pressure on that to push the inside one out. That seemed to be the best way. I could not pry them apart just physically pulling on the rims. Pushing was the best method. Here the two pots are side by side so you can get an idea of what they are. Like I said, the left one is the hydroponic one, so you'd put like leca or some sort of more like stone or typical hydroponic media. The right one, I believe you're going to put hydroponic media in the bottom and then you're going to top it off with soil. I'm not sure if I'm going to use that pot, but I do have it to experiment with. The kit also comes with a few other parts in a bag. It did come apart in this video, and it must have been through shipping, but I will show you how to put these back together. It's pretty simple. Going through the manual, it is pretty good and pretty easy to see what you're supposed to do, so I will go through this little step by step in case you don't feel like reading the manual. There are 2 units for this. One is going to be including the pump, so it's a little longer than the other unit, but they both support 3 pots. We're going to start with the assembly on the first unit, and that is pretty easy. So let's check it out. So for this, like I said, it's simple. You're just going to put this little O-ring, not really an O-ring, I guess it's more like a rubber washer. You're going to put it over the spigot part. Maybe that's not even called a spigot. I guess the threaded threaded tube. And then you're just going to screw on that elbow bracket that has like a quick release for the little pipe that's going to attach to it. So just screw it nice and tight and then make sure it's facing downward, because that'll be, I guess, the best orientation for the future setup. If your little filter thing came undone in the mail, it's pretty easy. You're just going to dump all those little clay pellets back into the main like filter body, and then you're just going to cap it with the cap. It's pretty simple. It's a pressure fit. Just push it in there nice and you should be all set. So in the manual, this is what I was talking about. It says it literally says, do not place your planter higher than the water tank, otherwise the water can't flow back into the tank, and make sure the water pipe are not folded. So that's the exact opposite. The picture shows what you're not supposed to do, but the description seems to be backwards. So you want the planter higher than the water tank, so that way it can drain back in. Otherwise, if you have that planter lower than the water tank, it's just going to keep filling up basically until it gets to the height of the inlet on the water tank, if that makes any sense. And you'll see this more when I assemble it. But it's really important, otherwise you'll flood like your room basically. The next portion of the assembly is going to be to install the hose, the intake hose for our water source, and we're going to put the little filter on there. So take your skinnier hose from this kit and you're going to thread it through or not thread it, I guess just insert it through the one open hole in our reservoir, and then you're going to jam the filter end into the pipe. It's just friction fitting. There's not like a lot of pressure going on, so if you really wanted, you could zip tie this or hose clamp it down, but it's not necessary. Also, do not cut the hose now. It does in the directions mentioned you can cut the hose to length, but wait until you have everything sort of set up and then you can make your final decision for cutting the hose. I don't like to cut anything until I really need to, so just leave the hose full length for now. I'll show you now where the hose is going to connect, and you will see me set this up again later. I was waiting for parts when I filmed most of this, and that went by parts I mean the little shelves that they sit on. But with this little elbow bracket, you can push in the little plastic ring, and that will free up the little tube that's extending, and then you can just insert that tube like pressure fit into the rubber tubing. That way you don't have to like force it on the elbow joint, putting like weird pressures on it. It's a lot easier to get the hose on the tube rather than like doing it all while it's connected, if that makes sense. You should be able to understand what I'm saying by seeing this footage. Alright, next up we're going to move to the other end of this unit. So this is the opposite end of the intake that we just saw, and this is basically the outflow, and this is where it's going to come out of this unit and go into the second unit. So we need to attach some little elbow joints that they provided, and we're going to use the larger hosing for this. So you can probably cut like probably 2 inches is best, or I would just measure what the length of the elbow joint is and pretty much double it because that's the length of the little outlet on the actual unit, and it can be a pretty short piece here. So like I said, about 2 inches, and you're just going to connect both of them. You can cut the same exact length a second time because we're going to do another exact like elbow joint on the other unit, and the same length is important because when you put them on a shelf, they're going to line up for when we connect them with the final hose. So you might as well cut both while you're at it. Once you have that hose cut, then you can just attach it to the elbow joint and then push it into the actual unit. Everything is push fit. Again, if you're really concerned with flooding or something, I would throw some zip ties on there or hose clamps, but not too hard because a lot of this plastic is pretty thin. Now with your second unit, basically on the same end, I'll like simulate what we're going to do. Again, I'll do it for real later on once I get the actual shelves, but you're just going to match ends if the two units are parallel together, and you'll see how we can aim the elbow joints at each other. And then you're going to cut a piece of hose once you put this in your final resting place, like to connect the two units. Then finally, on the opposite end of that second unit, that's where you're going to connect the outflow to the actual bucket reservoir, and that's going to complete our entire circle. So the first unit with the motor sucks the water up, pumps it in, it fills up, then it overflows into the second unit, and then the second unit overflows into our bin. So you can kind of see why they need to be at different heights or equal, so that way you don't get any backup or buildup of water and flooding. Like I said before, I am just doing the hydroponic setup. I'm probably not going to do the soilless one, at least not the first one, or the soil one, at least not the first one. So I'll just show you how to install it in case you want to, though. You will end up removing the hydroponic ones, which are the shorter ones. You're going to put those little like support spacer square things that came in the box, and then you can just drop in the larger, taller pots in there. That's pretty much all it is for setting up the soil one. I'm not really sure how you want to fill that up. I'm guessing maybe some leca in the bottom that's going to touch the water, and then you can put your soil so that way the leca leaches up the soil. Otherwise, you're just going to see erosion as the water flows through, sucking the soil out and plugging everything up. So I guess that's up to you, but I'm going to stick to the hydroponics. Like I sort of mentioned earlier in the video, I was waiting on these two shelves to actually set this up. That's why I tried to simulate stuff in the footage, but now we can do it for real and actually set these things up properly. Like I said, they did send me 2 units so I can experiment with them and play around with them, and I'm going to set both of them up. So like we mentioned earlier, there is an order to how you should do this, especially if you're doing like a shelving setup like this. And that is the like base dummy unit, which is the one without the pump. That is going to be towards the bottom, and the outlet is going to be level with the bucket inlet, if that makes sense. Remember, we don't want to overflow anything. So if the bucket is higher, the water won't be able to just naturally drain into the bucket, and your hydroponic unit will fill up with water and overflow. Finally, then we're going to put the active unit, which is the one with the pump, up a little bit higher, and we're just going to connect all the hoses that we talked about earlier. So at this point, you can start fitting them together and cutting them to their proper distance. So I'm going to take that inlet hose that we mentioned earlier, which is the much skinnier one, and that is going to connect to that elbow bracket, the one that we screwed into it, and that's attached to the power unit. And at this point, you can kind of get an idea of how long you want it to be. I made sure my little thing had quite a bit of extra like piping at the bottom of the reservoir, that way it's not like tugging on it and I have a little bit of play. And so then I cut it at that point and attached it to where we mentioned we were supposed to attach it, which is the elbow bracket. Then you're going to use that larger hose and you're going to connect the outlet of the dummy unit to the inlet of the bucket. And remember, try and make sure this is either straight across and level, or the dummy unit is higher than the bucket. This is really important that everything is higher than the bucket, at least actually they all should be, because if anything is lower than the bucket, it will flood your room. You must be sure to do this. Do not make the bucket higher. Anyways, moving on, the last thing we do have to connect is the upper unit to the lower unit, and this is why I said don't cut anything yet until you have it in the final resting place, and then you can make your judgments and hook them all together. Again, everything is pressure fit, but I would potentially put maybe some hose clamps on, but very lightly. This plastic is not very thick, so you don't want to put a ton of pressure on it. And once you've done that, it should look something like this. You should have a continuous circle of hoses that will complete a full circle. It's going to suck it up from one end, pump it through, drain into the second unit, and back into the bucket. At this point, do not plug this thing in. When you plug it in, it's going to start a cycle. So you need to put water in the reservoir, or you could potentially burn your pump out. I found that out because I plugged it in. The cycle started instantly. I could hear the pump going, so I turned it off. I mean, a little bit ain't going to hurt you, but don't let it run like an hour or something without having water in it. So like I said, you're going to have to put water in the reservoir. You can kind of pre-prime these units if you want by just dumping water into the units, because I did notice that there is like a certain level of water that will always be maintained in these units before it like overflows into the next. So it's an easier way to sort of not underfill your bucket or overfill your bucket, so choose one or the other. Once you've got everything filled with water, you can start it up by plugging it in. There is a phone app for this, but honestly I'm not going to use it. I hate Internet of Things devices because they're always some like software that's kind of put together in a weird way using a bunch of third-party apps. The security is horrible and just not something I'm into using. But luckily, because this thing just starts a cycle on power up, I did use a timer that I can just make it run like every 10 minutes. Basically, I can make it power up every 10 minutes. It'll run a cycle and be done. So I can manually force this thing to do cycles without even worrying about the app or whatever functionality is already running on here. I don't know. You can do this if you want to hook it up to your app and Wi-Fi, but I personally don't like hooking anything up to my Wi-Fi. So a timer is a quick way around that. And then the final step for me is to put my hydroponic medium. You can put whatever hydroponic medium you want in here. I definitely wouldn't put something in super fine so that the motors don't suck it up. I'm using leca, and that's going to be what I'm going to use. I'm not sure what I'm going to grow in here yet, so maybe in the comments you guys can decide or give me some suggestions on what you'd like to see, whether it be vegetables, aeroids, who knows. Just give me some ideas. I'm toiling about on a few different things, and I do have a bunch of different, or 2 units, so I can try some cool stuff. So yeah, that pretty much sums up this build. And if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments. I can help straighten something out. But yeah, this is probably one of the coolest products someone has sent, so hopefully this works. I am always skeptical of really anything, so we'll see. I will make an update basically once I start growing stuff in here, and we'll see how it performs over time.
Well guys, that pretty much sums up this review. I hope you enjoyed it, and it's been a pretty good change of pace for like reviewing products. It's pretty much been only grow lights ever, so now there is something quite cool that we are reviewing, and we will see how things go over time. Like I said earlier, in the comments put down what you'd like to see me grow. Maybe I'll do vegetables in one unit and aeroids in the other, or if you have any other ideas, I'll try pretty much anything just to test them out. So let me know in the comments, and as always, may your plants grow strong and healthy. I'll see you next time.